The scent of pine and cinnamon should have been a comfort. It was the smell of my childhood, the smell of my own Christmases past, the smell I had worked so hard to recreate in this sprawling, modern house that never quite felt like a home. My home, the little cottage with its creaky floorboards and perpetually drafty windows, was filled with such smells from December 1st onward. But here, in my son David's house, the air was different. The pine came from a perfectly shaped, pre-lit tree purchased from a designer lot. The cinnamon was from a single, expensive candle placed with clinical precision on the mantelpiece. It was a beautiful fragrance, but it was a stage set, and I was a careful stagehand, terrified of moving a prop out of place. My work that morning was my love language, translated into 30 separate acts of devotion. Spread across the vast granite island in the kitchen were the gifts, not just any gifts. For my grandchildren, Kayla and Jadden, I did not buy one present. I bought 15, one for every day leading up to Christmas, a small treasure to mark the countdown. It was a tradition I had started when David was a boy, a way to stretch the magic. This year's collection was particularly special. I had begun my search in July, in dusty antique shops and quiet bookstores, looking for items that had a soul. A vintage kaleidoscope for Jadden, who loved patterns of light. A leather-bound journal with blank pages for Kayla, who I knew secretly wrote poetry. A set of wooden tops I had painted myself, a book of fairy tales from Ireland, a tiny music box that played Edelweiss. Each one was wrapped in paper I had chosen specifically for the child and the gift, tied with a ribbon and tagged with a handwritten note. My hand ached from the writing, but it was a good ache. I could feel Chloe watching me from the doorway of the living room. I did not need to turn around to know the expression on her face. It was a look I had become accustomed to over the 12 years of her marriage to David, a mixture of polite tolerance and simmering judgment. She was a beautiful woman, Chloe, with a sharp, elegant beauty that seemed to demand order. My exuberance, my sentimentality, my sheer volume of love expressed through asterisk things, it clearly unsettled her. "That is quite a mountain of presents, Eleanor," she said, her voice cool and smooth as the granite countertop. "I hope you did not go to too much trouble." I turned, forcing a smile. "It is no trouble at all. It is my joy." "The children are very fortunate," she replied, a statement that was technically generous but felt like a reprimand. "We do try to teach them moderation, of course, to appreciate the value of a few meaningful gifts rather than a quantity." The word quantity hung in the air between us, reducing my carefully curated treasures to a simple matter of bulk. I felt a familiar pang, a small wound opening just beneath my breastbone. "I understand," I said softly, turning back to my stacks. "Each one is meaningful, I promise." She did not answer. I heard the soft click of her heels on the hardwood floor as she walked away. The Christmas gathering itself was a study in surface-level harmony. David was wonderful, my sweet boy, now a man with worry lines around his eyes that had not been there a few years ago. He hugged me tightly, his embrace a brief sanctuary. "Everything looks amazing, Mom. The kids are over the moon." And they were. Kayla, 13 and teetering on the edge of adulthood, still had a child's gleam in her eye as she meticulously arranged her 15 gifts under the tree, organizing them by size. Jadden, 10 and all boundless energy, vibrated with excitement, shaking each box and guessing its contents. For a few hours, it was perfect. We ate the honey-glazed ham I had brought, we laughed at old stories, we sang carols around the designer piano. But the coldness was there, a persistent draft from Chloe's direction, a slight stiffening when I referred to a shared memory with David from his childhood, a subtle redirection of the conversation when Kayla asked me about the traditions I had growing up. I was a guest of honor who was constantly, quietly, being shown the door. The worst moment came as we were clearing the dessert plates. Jadden ran up and threw his arms around my waist. "Thanks for all the cool presents, Grandma," he shouted, his voice muffled by my sweater. Before I could even stroke his hair, Chloe was there, her hand on his shoulder, gently pulling him back. "Jadden, mind your manners, and remember what we discussed about personal space." She looked at me, her smile not reaching her eyes. He gets so overexcited. The correction was not about personal space. It was about the name, Grandma Asterisk. It was the name I had chosen, the name that was my right, my identity. And in that moment, standing in my son's house, being chastised for the affection of my own grandson, I felt more like an outsider than I ever had before. The wound beneath my breastbone deepened. The days after Christmas were a quiet come-down. I returned to my cottage, to the real pine smell of my own small tree, and tried to bask in the afterglow. But the memory of Chloe's coolness lingered like a chill. I told myself I was being overly sensitive. I was a grandmother who loved too much, that was all. It was a good problem to have. Then the packet arrived. It was a Tuesday, a flat gray day that promised nothing. The mail was usually just bills and catalogs, but this was different. A stiff, cream-colored envelope, too large for a regular letter, addressed in Chloe's impeccable handwriting. My name and address were written with a fountain pen, each character perfectly formed. Mrs. Alina Johnson *. Not Mom. Certainly not Grandma. Just Mrs. Johnson. A flicker of unease went through me. It was too formal, too correct. I took it inside to my kitchen table, the same table where I had wrapped those 30 gifts. The envelope was heavy. I opened it carefully, sliding out the contents. Inside were thank you notes, 30 of them, one for each gift. They were printed on thick, expensive cardstock. At the top of each was my name, again written in that flawless script. Dear Mrs. Johnson, the first one began, thank you for the thoughtful book. It is a lovely addition to Kayla's library. Sincerely, Kayla. I flipped through them. They were all the same, a collection of variations on a sterile theme. Dear Mrs. Johnson, thank you for the kaleidoscope. Jadon has enjoyed looking through it. Sincerely, Jadon. Dear Mrs. Johnson, thank you for the journal. It is a useful item. Sincerely, Kayla. Dear Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson *. The name began to swim before my eyes. It was not a mistake. It was not an oversight born of a child's forgetfulness. This was deliberate. This was curated just as I had curated the gifts. Each Mrs. Johnson was a tiny, precise incision, and together they were eviscerating me, they were erasing me, they were taking my title, my role, my very identity, and stuffing it into this cold, formal envelope. My hands began to shake. The paper felt like ice. This was not ingratitude. This was something far colder, far more calculated. This was a message. It was a dismissal so complete, so brutal in its politeness, that it took my breath away. I was no longer Grandma. I was Mrs. Johnson, a distant acquaintance who had sent an inconvenient quantity of presents. The pain was so sharp, so physical, I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. This was not a simple family disagreement. This was a wound, and as I stared at the 30 identical salutations, I knew with a terrifying certainty that it was a wound that would not heal. The silence in my own home was a physical weight, pressing down on me after Marcus left. His words, his excuses, they hung in the air like a bad smell. Formality. He had actually used that word. As if teaching a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old to address their own grandmother with the cold distance of Mrs. Johnson was some kind of beneficial life lesson. I paced the length of my living room, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I replayed the entire conversation, the way his shoulders had hunched, the way his eyes had darted around my face, landing anywhere but directly on me. That was the tell. My son had always been a terrible liar. When he was 9, he had tried to blame his brother for eating the last piece of chocolate cake, but he could not keep a straight face. The same flicker of guilt was there now, 30 years later, a ghost of the boy he had been haunting, the uncomfortable man he had become. He was trapped, I could see that clearly. But the nature of the trap was still a mystery. Was it simply the pressure of a demanding wife, or was it something more? The thought that Chloe, the woman my son had chosen to build a life with, would orchestrate this excision of me from my own grandchildren's lives was so venomous I could scarcely entertain it. Yet the alternative, that Marcus was a willing participant, was a blade twisting in a deeper, more tender place. I had to know. I could not live in this limbo of doubt and hurt. I decided I would go to them. Not to confront, not yet, but to see, to observe, to feel the atmosphere in that house for myself. Perhaps Marcus had simply misunderstood. Perhaps it was a temporary phase. I clung to these fragile hopes as I drove across town, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. The houses in their neighborhood were large and perfectly maintained, each lawn a uniform green, each facade a statement of achieved success. It was a world away from the comfortably cluttered home where I had raised Marcus and his brother, where fingerprints on the walls and toys on the floor were signs of life, not failures of housekeeping. I parked a few houses down, my pulse quickening. What was I doing? This felt like a reconnaissance mission against my own family. I took a deep breath and walked up the pristine stone path, ringing the doorbell before I could lose my nerve. The door opened after a moment, and Marcus stood there, his face a mask of surprise that quickly morphed into anxiety. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low. He did not open the door fully, his body blocking the entrance. "I was in the neighborhood," I lied smoothly. "I thought I would stop by and see the children. Is that not allowed?" I kept my tone light, but the challenge was implicit. He hesitated, a war playing out behind his eyes. I heard Chloe's voice call from deeper inside the house. "Marcus, who is it?" Before he could answer, a small tornado of energy named Kayla barreled into the hallway. "Grandma," she squealed, her little face lit with a genuine joy that felt like a sunbeam in the gloom. My heart soared. See, I told myself it is a misunderstanding. But then I saw Marcus flinch. He put a hand on Kayla's shoulder, a gentle but firm restraint. "Kayla, remember what we talked about," he said, his voice strained. Kayla's face clouded with confusion. She looked from her father to me, her little brow furrowed. Chloe appeared then, a silent silhouette at the end of the hall. She did not speak, but her presence was a cold wind that swept through the entryway. "Can I come in, Marcus?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. He relented, stepping aside. The house was oppressively quiet and tidy. No blaring cartoons, no scattered Legos. It felt more like a museum than a home with young children. Kayla clung to my leg as I walked into the living room. Liam was sitting on the rug, quietly stacking blocks. He gave me a shy smile but did not speak. "How is my favorite big girl?" I asked Kayla, kneeling down to her level. "I am drawing a picture of a castle," she announced proudly, "with a queen." "That sounds wonderful. Maybe you can show it to me sometime." She nodded, then her expression grew serious, as if remembering something important. She leaned closer to me, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was tragically loud in the silent room. "Mommy said we have to call you Mrs. Johnson now." The air left my lungs. The world seemed to slow down, the colors bleaching out around me. I could feel Marcus's gaze burning into the side of my face. I could sense Chloe's rigid posture from across the room. "Why would Mommy say that, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice a thin thread of sound. Kayla, innocent and unaware of the devastation her words were causing, blinked up at me. "Because you are not a real grandma like Papa's new wife. Grandma Chloe is the real one." The words were simple, a child's literal interpretation of a poisonous idea. But their meaning was profound and cruel. It was not a lesson in formality. It was a campaign. A deliberate, calculated campaign to rewrite history, to alienate my grandchildren from me, to reduce me to a stranger with a formal title. Papa's new wife. My ex-husband's new wife was now the real grandmother, and I was nothing. A footnote. Mrs. Johnson. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling weak. I looked at Marcus. The guilt on his face was now mixed with a panicked helplessness. He had known the full truth and had offered me that pathetic excuse about formality, but my gaze swept past him and landed on Chloe. She was watching me, and for the first time I saw no pretense there. I saw a cold, hard satisfaction. The fragile hope I had been clinging to shattered into a million sharp pieces. This was the unraveling truth, and it was more terrible than any suspicion I had harbored. "I think you should leave, Alina," Chloe said, her voice crisp and final. That was it, the dismissal, the command, and Marcus said nothing. He just stood there, a prisoner in his own home, complicit through his silence. Rage, hot and cleansing, flooded my veins. I would not be dismissed, not like this. I walked right up to Chloe, stopping only a foot from her. The air between us crackled with a hatred that had been simmering for years. "What have you done?" I asked, my voice low and trembling. "What have you been telling my grandchildren?" Her composure did not break. A small, icy smile touched her lips. "I have been telling them the truth. I am their grandmother. I am the one who is here every day. I am the constant. You are just a visitor from their father's past, an interruption." "I am their blood," I shot back, the words tearing from my throat. "I held Marcus when he was their age. I have loved those children since the day they were born. You cannot just erase me." "You erode this family, Alina," she hissed, her voice dropping so the children would not hear, though the venom was unmistakable. "You have never accepted me. You have always tried to pull Marcus away to make him choose. You with your little guilt trips, your spontaneous visits, you think I do not see it? You are trying to steal his allegiance to turn him against me." The accusation was so twisted, so far from reality, that I could only stare at her in stunned horror. My attempts to stay connected to my son, to be a part of my grandchildren's lives, were being reframed as a malicious plot. "I have never asked him to choose," I cried. "I only wanted to be a part of their lives. You are the one who is making him choose. You are the one poisoning them against me." Her eyes narrowed. "This is my family now. I have built this, and I will not allow you to undermine it. Your influence ends here." She took a step forward, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You will not see them again. Do you understand me? Any contact, any attempt to reach out to Marcus or the children, and I will make sure you regret it." She turned her back on me, a final, contemptuous gesture. She walked over to Liam and picked him up, holding him as a shield. She looked at Marcus. "Show her out." And my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had thought I knew, could not even look at me. He just gestured weakly toward the door. "Mom, please, just go." I walked out of that house. The door clicked shut behind me, a sound as final as a tomb ceiling. I stood on the perfect porch, staring out at the perfect street, and felt a void open inside me. They were gone. My son, my grandchildren. They had been taken from me not by accident or by distance, but by the deliberate, hateful design of the woman who now ruled their home. And Marcus had let it happen. The fight was over, and I had lost. But as I drove away, the numbness began to recede, replaced by a new, cold clarity. She thought my influence was ended. She had no idea what a grandmother who had nothing left to lose was capable of. The battle for my family was only beginning, and I would not fight fair. I would not fight clean. I would get them back, no matter the cost. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It was not a peaceful quiet, not the gentle hush of a sleeping house. It was a heavy, suffocating absence that filled every room. It pressed against my eardrums, a constant, deafening reminder of what was supposed to be. The nursery, once a sanctuary of hopeful anticipation, had become a chamber I could not bear to enter. I had closed the door, a futile attempt to shut away the ghost of a future that would never cry, never laugh, never call my name. The tiny socks, the soft blankets, the mobile waiting for a breeze that would never come, they were all still in there, frozen in time. The joy I had envisioned, the warmth of a grandchild in my arms, had been replaced by this void. For days, I moved through the house like a phantom. I would catch my reflection in the window glass and not recognize the woman staring back. The light in her eyes had been extinguished. I was adrift in a sea of what-ifs and if-onlys, the waves of grief pulling me under again and again. How could a bond I thought was unbreakable, a relationship forged over 30 years of love and care, be so systematically dismantled? It was not a single, clean break. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, each whispered doubt, each manufactured slight, each carefully placed wedge, expertly administered by Chloe. And I had not seen the weapon until it was too late. I had been too busy building a bridge, not realizing she was on the other side, setting it ablaze. The doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive sound that shattered the fragile stillness. My heart, a leaden weight in my chest, gave a painful thud. I knew who it was. Part of me wanted to pretend I was not home, to let the silence swallow me whole again. But another part, the mother, could not ignore the summons. I opened the door, and there he was, Marcus, alone. He looked like a man who had not slept in weeks. His shoulders were slumped, his face etched with a weariness that went far beyond physical exhaustion. The guilt was a palpable aura around him, a thick fog of regret. "Mom," he said, his voice raspy. He did not wait for an invitation. He simply stepped inside, as if he did not have the strength to stand on the porch any longer. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, my own voice sounding foreign to me, flat and empty. He shook his head, his eyes darting around the living room, avoiding the closed nursery door. "I cannot stay long." We stood there, a chasm of unsaid words between us. The air was thick with everything that had been broken. "She would not let me bring him," Marcus finally blurted out, his words tumbling over one another. "I tried, Mom. I swear I tried. I said it was cruel. I said he was your grandson. But she said it would confuse him. She said he needed stability, a single family unit." He let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "A unit that explicitly does not include you." I wrapped my arms around myself, a feeble defense against the chill his words brought. "Why, Marcus? Help me understand. What did I do to make her hate me so much? It is not hate, he said, sinking onto the sofa as if his legs could no longer support him. He buried his face in his hands for a moment before looking up, his eyes pleading for me to understand something he himself could barely comprehend. It is something much sadder. It is a deep, rotting insecurity, a void inside her that she is trying to fill by controlling everything around her. He began to talk, the confession pouring out of him like poison from a wound. He told me about Chloe's childhood, things she had only whispered to him in the dark, a transient life, parents who were emotionally absent, a series of temporary houses that never felt like homes. She had never had a stable family, a real foundation. She saw what we had, you and I, Marcus continued, his gaze fixed on the floor. She saw the history, the inside jokes, the easy love, and instead of wanting to be a part of it, she saw it as a threat. She felt like an outsider in her own marriage. She believed that our bond, our history, was a wall that kept her out, so she decided she had to tear it down, brick by brick. The pieces clicked into place with a devastating finality. The subtle criticisms that began after the wedding. The way she would subtly correct my stories about Marcus's childhood as if my memories were invalid. The insistence on creating new traditions that deliberately excluded me. It was not about me personally. It was about what I represented. A past she could not control and a love she felt she had to compete with. She wanted a clean slate, Marcus whispered, the truth tasting like ash in his mouth. A new family, one that started with her, one where she was the center. And to do that, she felt she had to erase everything that came before, especially you. The anger I had been clinging to began to dissolve, replaced by a profound, aching pity. What a terrible way to live, to see love as a threat, to view connection as a competition. And you, I asked, my voice soft, where were you in all of this? The question hung in the air, and I watched the shame wash over him. I was weak, he admitted, his shoulders slumping further. I saw the little things, the comments, the isolation. I told myself it was just her way, that she would get over it, that if I just kept the peace, everything would be okay. I thought I was protecting my marriage, but I was not. I was enabling her, and I was betraying you. I am so sorry, Mom. I am so sorry. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and I saw the little boy he used to be, terrified of having disappointed his mother. But he was a man now, and his failure had consequences that could not be undone with an apology. I cannot fix this, he said, and the finality in his voice was the most painful thing I had heard yet. I am powerless. Any attempt I make to bridge the gap, she sees as a betrayal. She has built this reality, and if I challenge it, she threatens to take him and leave. I feel like I am in a prison of my own making. There it was, the truth I had been avoiding. My son was a hostage in his own home. The relationship I had mourned was not just damaged, it was annihilated. There would be no reconciliation, no magical moment where the scales fell from Chloe's eyes. This was the resolution. This was the legacy of loss. After Marcus left, the silence returned, but it felt different. The sharp edges of my grief had been worn down, sanded into a dull, permanent ache. The title of Grandma had been stolen, a name I would never hear. But as I stood there in the quiet house, I realized something. That title was just a word. What it represented, the love, the patience, the desire to nurture and guide, that was not something that could be taken from me. It was a part of my soul, irreversible and enduring. A few days later, I saw a notice at the local community center. They were looking for volunteers for an after-school reading program for children who were struggling. I looked at the flyer for a long time. Then, I picked up the phone and signed up. It started slowly. I would sit with small groups of children, their faces bright with concentration as they sounded out words. I would listen to their stories, their silly jokes, their big dreams. I did not replace the grandson I lost. That was a unique and singular pain that would always be with me. But I redirected the love that had nowhere else to go. I poured it into these children, into being a steady, kind presence in their lives. I became Miss Ellie, the lady with the good stories and the endless patience. And in their smiles, in the simple trust of a small hand placed in mine, I found a painful, complicated peace. The wound my family had inflicted was deep, and the scar would always be there. But I was learning that even a scarred heart could still beat, could still love, could still find a purpose. The story was not over, but this chapter was. I had survived the devastation. Yet, as I looked at a drawing one of the little girls had given me, a bright, lopsided sun, I could not shake a lingering, chilling thought. The silence in my own home had been broken, but out there, in the world my grandson was growing up in, what kind of silence was he being taught to accept? And the question that haunted me most of all was a simple one for which I knew I would never have an answer. Does he ever ask about me?